ESPNFC post-game immediately after the final whistle. Arsenal 3, Chelsea 1. Mark Donaldson alongside Janusz Mihalik. And Arsenal, for the time being, back on top of the table. But Manchester City still with those games in hand. So, Janusz, simple question to begin with. What is the bigger story in this one? Is it Arsenal's ability to bounce back well following that defeat against Manchester City? Or is it Chelsea's continuing ineptitude?
Well, I'd like to say both, but it's of course Arsenal. They're top of the table, and no matter what we think and what we've said as pundits or anybody else, obviously most of us see Manchester City as favorites. Arsenal are top of the league. They needed a bounce. This was a London derby against Chelsea team. Whatever we may think of them, and I think we'll dissect that in a second. You still have to win that game, and they've done it in a great fashion, especially in the first half. Took the foot off the table, just off the pedal, just a little bit in the second half. I suppose if Mikel Arteta has one thing to say is that clean sheet, because they have conceded so many goals at home. I think they're maybe second or third worst in the league. So uncharacteristic of Arsenal the way they're playing, but they are top of the league and they have their pride. They're fighting, and I think they'll fight until the end. As long as they keep winning the games, that will put pressure on Manchester City.
Would you agree that it was probably a good fixture for Arsenal? It wasn't a game that they were definitely expected to win and score loads of goals. It was a game that they enjoy playing against Chelsea in a London derby. So the focus was already there, but they still had to do something. They still had to get the result. They still had to perform. They did all of that.
Well, I mean, when you come into the game, I mean, two teams, they're coming into the game not in form, if you will, right? I mean, 4 winless for Arsenal. I think it was 6 in the Premier League for Chelsea. Obviously, that record is even worse as you dig deeper in all competitions for them. But yes, some changes. I think they were to be expected. I think the biggest one, of course, was Jakub Kiwior because of his inexperience, his first start in the game. Hasn't had too many looks. If you look at Kiwior, I remember the game, the 2-2 against Sporting. I mean, he didn't look good in that game. Actually, I think he was substituted in the 71st minute in that game. So that was a big call. I think bringing in, some of the other chances. Jorginho obviously understands Chelsea. Chelsea did that with Aubameyang, maybe not with the effect that they expected, I suppose, although I don't know what they were expecting from a player that hasn't played in such a long time. But Mikel Arteta rotated, and fair play to him. I think the players that came in were tremendous. I do want to mention THRASH, because I thought he was very, very good. Yeah. It was just a simple rotation. I think he's different to Martinelli, offers something different, and we saw that in the first half, and I think it was important. And maybe a little bit of luck by chance because of a rotation, but I think, you saw Xhaka kind of, on that left-hand side, delivering 2 very good passes, if you will, to Martin Odegaard for the goals. Martinelli, as we all know, likes to go to the byline a little bit more, and THRASH is silky smooth in terms of playing between the lines, changing positions. Maybe playing the false 9 has helped him with that. But no matter what Arteta thought it was going to happen, the changes he made paid off.
Yeah, let's bring in James Ollie, who's been reporting on the game for ESPN FC. James, at the Emirates, what was your biggest takeaway from what you saw?
That Chelsea are a shambles, an absolute shambles. And we probably already knew that, to be fair. But, look, I mean, Arsenal didn't have to be very good to win here. I thought they were quite nervous at the start. You could tell there were 1 or 2 mistakes in their play. Obviously, they've made 3 changes to the starting lineup. 1 or 2 maybe just trying to find their feet a little bit. They haven't won in the last 4 games. We all know the narrative about where they are in the title race coming into this. But Chelsea just gave them every opportunity to play their way into a bit of form, into a bit of confidence. And it ended up being an absolute stroll for them. And honestly, I thought some of those Chelsea players weren't even trying in the first half. And I could see Frank Lampard just down in the dugout in front of the press box, and the sort of look of just raw, almost shock on his face at what he was watching, particularly at 3-0. You could see Thiago Silva arguing with Ben Chilwell after the second goal. You just saw, as the Arsenal players ran off to celebrate, if they weren't arguing, they weren't even talking to each other after the first goal and the third goal. Particularly the third goal, I think all 11 players just stood hands on hips, no one talking to anyone, and that is such a sign of a team of individuals, no collective spirit, no fight, Lampard's talked a lot about pride in the Chelsea shirt and really trying to lift them in that sense for the rest of the season. I didn't see any of that tonight. Second half, a little bit better, but again, Arsenal took their foot off the gas. Probably already starting to think about Newcastle and that massive game they've got on Sunday. I just thought Chelsea gave them every chance to just come and take the 3 points.
Yeah, Janusz, that's quite an accusation, and it's hard to argue against what James is saying, that some of the players looked like they weren't trying, because if there's one thing a footballer hates to be spoken about, is he didn't try, she didn't try, or whatever. But you couldn't argue against what James has just said, because in that first half, in the first half hour, Aubameyang had 4 touches of the ball. Joao Felix, who the manager said pre-game is someone that he doesn't know what his best position is, so he can't have him as a number 9. Yet he picks Aubameyang there. What's the biggest issue for Chelsea right now, Janusz?
Well, James is right. And I mean, you almost have to go even further, right? Because it's a dumpster fire. It really is. It's beyond embarrassing, because, you can lose games, but you have to compete. And that's what wasn't there. And James has mentioned a couple of examples. If you just simply look at the goals, on the first one, Kovacic doesn't even step up, right? On the second from Odegaard, who was it that didn't step up? I think Sterling obviously saw him and let him go. Thiago Silva couldn't step up. On the third goal, Silva and Fofana are defending on their butts after Aspi gets played behind on a simple cross. So, I mean, you look at this and you just have a feeling that, Chelsea has mailed it in long time ago. They really have. And that's the worst of it, right? Because, you can say all you want about Frank Lampard, right? Maybe he's not ready. Maybe he's not good enough. But imagine him as a player, what he must be thinking, right? I mean, he's played at Chelsea. We all know the way he's played the game and the sort of leadership he provided. So looking at that, and I think the camera zoomed in on our feed. James, I'm not sure if James saw it, but Mark, I'm sure you have, right? I think it was after the second goal. I mean, he was so close to just having a go at these players. I mean, you could see that he had to stop himself to do or to say whatever he wanted to say. Because as I've said, I mean, you just can't have that. I mean, we've said everything there's been to say about Chelsea because this season has been terrible, but it's getting worse and worse. I mean, you've got to have a little bit of pride. In a London derby against Arsenal, it's not going to change the way you have your season, but as players, I mean, you being looked at by your supporters, by the manager, by the ownership, and this is just, I mean, it's hard really to explain how easily Arsenal has had it in the first half.
Yeah, look, I think the story here, of course, I think you're right, Janusz. It's Arsenal. Chelsea can't be the story, no matter how bad they are, when a win by Arsenal has taken them to the top of the table. James, when the dust has settled, wherever Arsenal finish, the likelihood is it's probably going to be second. Will they look back on this season and see that since Saliba got hurt, they haven't kept a single clean sheet? But even further back than that, they've only kept 3 clean sheets at home in the league in 17 games. Is that something they need to strengthen if they want to have another title challenge next year?
You could trace a lot of this season back to the sort of turning point when Saliba got injured in that Sporting Lisbon game, because they were winning. I think they were 1-0 up at that point. Yeah. So they were qualifying for the Europa League the next round. On the night, Saliba goes off injured. They concede. They go out. It's the penalties, I think. And then, as you say, they've not kept a clean sheet since. I mean, I think there's other factors in play here beyond that. I don't want to lay this all on the feet of Rob Holding, but I think we've probably seen in the last few weeks what I think the suspicion has been for quite some time, that he's not really good enough for a team that wants to win a title. I think he's been found out. Difficult for him to come in these circumstances, in these big games, in such pressure environments at this stage of the season, but I think he's probably not quite good enough. I think the fact that Julio played tonight was sort of an indication that perhaps Arteta may feel the same, and he's already starting to think about next season and think about whether he could play more of a prominent role. But, they do look a little shaky at the back too often. I think part of it is because of the style of play. They try to do what City do. They try to sit very high. They try to control the game. Obviously, the fullbacks push on an awful lot. Zinchenko comes into midfield, and they do take a lot of risks in their play. And when you don't quite have the control of the game, as sometimes they haven't in midfield, and Thomas Partey's not had the best recent few matches, and that's been a factor in it as well. When you don't control the game in midfield, you are going to give up more chances on the break. And it's been those sort of goals that they've conceded. So I don't think it's just a centre-back issue. I do think in midfield they probably need another player to strengthen. Obviously, Declan Rice is the one that we believe they're going to go for in the summer, and that makes sense in that context because it just enables them to control the ball a little bit more. And then the problem isn't at centre-back. You can actually snuff out the threat in midfield further up the pitch.
Yeah, look, this is to the nth degree. This is like intricately looking at Arsenal, and ultimately they've had a great season. I was speaking to a couple of friends of mine who are Arsenal supporters, and they were saying, while it was great to get Gabriel Jesus back, they felt they maybe put him back into the starting lineup maybe a little bit too quickly. That was only the second game today that Arsenal have won since Gabriel Jesus came back from injury. Could there have been some games where maybe the way it was when it was working, with Martinelli out wide and Trossard as a kind of false nine, James, might have been a better option? Again, we're nitpicking, and they've had such a good season, Arsenal, but just looking at certain little things that might have been tweaked, could it have been a little bit different, or is that just clutching at straws?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, the goal threat hasn't disappeared, has it? They've still been scoring goals in games. I understand the argument, and look, with hindsight, you could maybe suggest that Trossard or Martinelli through the middle, maybe for a game or two extra or for longer periods in matches, might have given them a little bit more control without the ball, maybe. But no, I just think they've come up. They're going to come up short. It looks like they're going to come up short in terms of the title, purely because I think physically they've just started to feel it in their legs. They've been relying on, there's a stat doing the rounds about, I think it's, they've now got Odegaard, Saka, Martinelli, all 20-plus goal involvements in the Premier League this season, which no other team has done. And that's a fantastic, individual feat for those three players. But it just shows the reliance on those three to carry that creative threat time and time again. They've maybe relied on them a little bit too much. I think Saka in particular has looked a little bit physically jaded in recent weeks. And look, I think the accusations that they bottled it were a little bit harsh, but I think there's certainly been a mental pressure that they have felt in the last 2 or 3 weeks when City have started winning and hunting them down. And you only need to look at the way that they've conceded the leads in matches. Think about, the 2-0 leads at Liverpool, that can happen. Even at West Ham losing 2-0 lead, that can happen. And of course you can struggle at home against a side that's fighting for their lives in relegation. But when you put those three results together and then just how they kind of folded at Manchester City, that little collective 4-game run points, I think, to just a young side not quite able to handle with the toughest moments, the pressure where it's all just about execution. It's about, you don't have to do anything new in these games. You just have to execute under pressure what you've been doing all season. Manchester City are proven, over the course and distance time again at being able to do that, and they've really come into their own on that score. They've not necessarily stepped it up, I think, in recent weeks. They've just done what they do, performing to their level, and Arsenal haven't quite been able to replicate that.
Janis?
Yeah, I mean, look, they play the Arsenal way. I mean, if you compare them to Manchester City, as you've mentioned, James, look, I mean, I don't want to say they're just 2 players short, but let's not forget where Manchester City, they're very similar teams in the way they play, of course. Remember where Manchester City were? I mean, before they got Ruben Dias, that was the missing piece, wasn't it? I mean, defensively, Manchester City weren't all that great. Same issues, really. And as you've said, in the midfield, I'm not going to say they're going to get Rodri, but Declan Rice, they desperately need a player like him, of course. So those are 2 players, because going forward, I mean, look at this. I mean, they've scored 81 goals to Manchester City 84. Let's not forget that Manchester City have Erling Haaland, who scored 34 goals. So I don't think there's a reliance on them. They score by committee. And if you look at Manchester City, I mean, look at Arsenal and the young players that are contributing right now. They're just going to get better. And I think they're going to share those goals. I'm not saying they're going to score the same amount, but they are built to score goals, right? When you look around, because I look at Manchester City and forget Haaland, but you have De Bruyne who can score goals, Mahrez who can score goals, Bernardo Silva, Grealish, right? Young Julian Alvarez scored 4 goals in the World Cup. So when you look at Arsenal now, the way they play, and they do play the Arsenal way, the way I think we all want to see the game being played. Talking Arsenal way, of course, from our Arsene Wenger era. I think they're very, very close, because this all came about very, very quickly, because obviously nobody anticipated that this young team can perform like this. So I think that, maybe some are being very, very harsh. They're in the fight, as we said. I still firmly believe that Manchester City are going to take it, but they are top of the league by a point. They are putting pressure on Manchester City until the end. And remember those fights and battles that Liverpool had, and they were way more balanced with Manchester City. It was tight as well. It continues to be tight here. And I think they really know, as James was saying, what they need to do. They're 2-3 players away from, again, competing at a higher level, maybe more realistic level.
It's not, I think people talk about the strength and depth of City as if numerically they have it.
Right.
So I don't think they do. If you look at their bench at a lot of games, they've got quite a few kids on their bench. It's more that when they rotate 2 or 3, there is absolutely no drop-off in the level of quality. You think about the wide play, we're talking about Saka, Martinelli, Odegaard, what they've done this season. I think Leandro Trossard has been a really, really good addition. And when you think about, they spent the whole of January trying to get Mudryk, obviously he came off the bench with Chelsea tonight, and they ended up pivoting to Trossard late on. In that context, it was a great deal, and it's been really helpful for them in terms of a top 4 spot. But the very highest level, talking about trying to win a title, it's not quite the same as having Mahrez, Grealish, Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden. They're just utterly interchangeable at the very highest level. And, and even it's not a case of rotation for physical reasons. If one of them's having an off day, you can just go and get Phil Foden for half an hour. You can go, Grealish is obviously taking his game to a new level of consistency this season. But the City have proven top quality players in those advanced attacking positions. Look at Alvarez, by the way. We all talk about Haaland. Alvarez, every time he comes in, you think, oh my God, they've got a real player here. Fulham, I was at Fulham on Sunday, and again, you're just thinking, okay, 1-1, looking around a little bit, they didn't have the same level of control, and then Alvarez goes and produces that out of nothing. And again, in the same way that I think Liverpool got a lot of criticism for, not quite being able to get themselves over the line before they won their title going head-to-head with City. I think Arsenal are in a similar position. They just don't quite have that absolute elite quality in every position, and nor should they, by the way, because they're ahead of schedule. So this isn't a criticism of Arsenal's recruitment or where they are. It's just a case of the fact that they are up against an absolute machine that is so well drilled, whose recruitment is several years ahead of where Arsenal are. That those are just the gains they need to make in the coming.
That's the danger, James, isn't it? That's the danger, that next year there's going to be expectations of that, because the 2 or 3 players that I've mentioned would have given them the points, at least in the Premier League, right? A lot of the points that they've lost, if you have a Declan Rice or another center back, top level, experienced, proven center back. But when you look at all the competitions, this is the key point, is that this is still going to take years, right? Arsenal aren't going to be, even if they get those 2 or 3 players, they're not going to be able to compete at the highest level in the Champions League, in the Premier League. But I think, in one of those competitions, 2 or 3 players can maybe get them a little bit closer. But in terms of depth, that takes time.
Yeah. I'm glad we kind
of... There's Champions League football to contend with next season here for us.
Exactly.
It's the first time in what it is, 5 or 6 years. And so they can't rotate 5-6 for a Europa League game against a sort of European minnow. They're gonna have to attack that competition. So, obviously with the increased revenue means they should have some more money to spend in the summer, but they're going to have to be very cute. I think Arteta said it today, actually. They've got to nail their recruitment. That's absolutely right, because, City will improve again. We know Chelsea will probably spend again. Liverpool, Manchester United, all of the challenges are going to come and be renewed in the next season.
I'm glad we kind of spoke about Arsenal and the positivity of the season as a whole, because ultimately they deserve that, and they performed well this evening in a tricky game against Chelsea. But I want to leave that positivity behind, and I want to end and finish up by talking about Chelsea and where they go from here, because I'm going to give you the lineup tonight. How many of these players would each of you start with or think would start the first league game of next season? Kepa in goal as Piliqueta, Fofana, Thiago Silva and Ben Chilwell. N'Golo Kante, Enzo Fernandez and Mateo Kovacic. Madueke, Aubameyang and Sterling. How many of them, roughly, start with you, Janusz, do you reckon will start the first game of next season?
Well, there's quite a few. I think the issue they have and they've put themselves in is going to be a big question of how many of the players that need to be going they're going to be able to get rid of, right? If you look at financial fair play, we know there's money, but a lot's going to be depend on the movement out, and a lot of them will. I mean, Enzo Fernandez is going to be fine with Conte, with better players around them. We've seen that internationally, and Thiago Silva's still going to be fine. Chilwell's probably going to be there. Kepa could be, right. They have two good goalkeepers. So take your pick. But I think they're at a point right now that, just like us, they find themselves in a situation that they didn't anticipate. Maybe they should, but they didn't. And there's probably zero idea how to go from there, because first and foremost, they have to nail down a manager who, I don't know if that manager can guarantee him that, but a leadership where they feel comfortable, somebody like a Ten Hag that comes in a moment of crisis where you don't expect it. I mean, let's not forget where Manchester United were in the beginning of the season.
Good point.
So finding a leader like that is not easy, but that to me is the first thing, because if the team believes, then I believe there's enough players there that if you just add a couple pieces, can compete again. When I say compete, not be in the 12th place, but maybe have a fight for top 4, because that team, I don't see how possibly can fight for the title next year. So before we talk about players, we need to talk about the director of football. We need to talk about the proper manager, because managers have the ability to do that. And there are not many of them around, but that to me is the first point, because to say now that this player should stay or not, it all depends on who's going to be the manager, how he sees the game.
James, after you answer that question about how many of the players do you think will start first game of next season, if you could also give us a wee update, if you don't mind, about Pochettino, what the latest is, and if it is to be him, why are they taking so long to announce it?
Well, first question, I'm just going through it here. I think 6 is probably the maximum, because I think they'll look to upgrade the goal. I actually think Kepa's done all right since he's come back in. I think we did okay tonight. But I think they'll look to upgrade the goalkeeper position. Kovacic not been offered a new deal yet. There's talk that he could be one that moves on. Aubameyang will definitely move on. Difficult. I think Raheem Sterling's a 50-50. I think that will depend on how much the new manager fancies him. Cesar Azpilicueta, I think, will go. The players like Fofana and Enzo Fernandez, they've invested so much money in them. And I mean, Enzo Fernandez has got a contract through to basically retirement age. So these aren't players they can just suddenly dispense with. So I think whoever the new manager is, and we think it probably still will be Pochettino, will probably be told there is a core of players here that we've invested heavily in that you have to work with, and then you can make a call on some of the more fringe players and who we try and sell to obviously streamline a really bloated squad with, I think it's 31 first-team players. Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why the Pochettino appointment hasn't happened yet. I think it was sort of painted last week as a done deal. When I spoke to people close to Pochettino and to Chelsea, they were sort of quite adamant to say, look, this is the direction of travel. I think, he likes the job, they like him. But they still had quite a lot of things to sort out. And I do think one of them is going to be, one of the elements here is control over transfers and the influence over recruitment. Because you have to remember that Todd Bowley's appointed an awful lot of senior executives at the club. They have a technical director, they have 2 sporting directors who've led the managerial search. They have Joe Shields, who's also operating in a recruitment capacity. They've got multiple voices feeding in to the recruitment strategy. Remember, although Todd Bowley and Bedard Igbali are trying to take a back seat, they will still, they still hold the purse strings, right? So they're still going to want to have final sign-off on those deals. So there's multiple voices competing. And Mauricio Pochettino, having experienced ownership at PSG and obviously the quite famous issues that he had with Daniel Levy at Tottenham, he knows that he needs to have an element of control over who goes out first before who comes in. And I do think that is one of the reasons why this is being held up. I think also Chelsea would like him to come in now. I think we can see This is a squad that's really treading water at best until the summer, and just everyone's desperate for the reset that the summer and the new manager will bring in. My understanding is Pochettino is quite reluctant to do that. I think he'd rather wait until the summer. Why waste the new manager bounce, if you like, now? Why not let them get through to the end of the season? He could almost watch from afar, make his initial judgments on a few players, let them go away on holiday, then get them back for pre-season and go from there. I think Chelsea know that they would rather get players out of the door before then, and I do think this is another bone of contention. Without going into too much detail, Chelsea's financial accounts, the year end is June 30. They've spent £600 million on players. They need to get players out before June 30th. If Pochettino was to start July the 1st, they have a problem there. They need to get those players out sooner. So I do think they're trying to probably come to an arrangement where Pochettino maybe starts before he officially starts, if you like, or they find a way that he starts maybe at the beginning of June rather than July, so that he can, while the players are away, or maybe at the back end of the season, he can make his judgments, and they can just start working on getting players out, because they do have issues with financial fair play. That is another factor, of course. No qualification for any European football of any description is a huge blow to their revenue, and not one that they factored into their accounting when they were spending all the money they spent last summer and then in January. So I think it will still happen. All the noises are still positive around it, but these are the details and the finer points that they're having to work out in these days, the coming days.
Some really good info there from James Ollie. Thank you to you. Janusz Mihalik, thanks to you as well. Plenty to ponder for Chelsea about what comes next. But for Arsenal, when the players go to bed this evening, they will go to bed with a 2-point lead over Manchester City, albeit the men from the Etihad have 2 games in hand and can return to the top of the table if they beat West Ham on Wednesday. But for now, Arsenal are top dogs, 2 points clear of City after a 3-1 win over Chelsea. Bye for now.